Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Front Engineers event. Yeah, it takes my brain a little moment to get around that. Front End Engineers, but we've shortened it for quirkiness. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Abby. I work with Barry Cranford, who is the founder of Front Engineers. That's just one of the communities that's run by RecWorks. We are a tech recruitment company with a massive difference. As a company, we believe that recruitment really can be a force for good in the industry beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus on learning, mentoring, and personal development. If people want to learn and others want to teach or share knowledge, we are happy to connect you through our communities and events. We see this as giving back to those we've worked with in the past, but also paying it forward to those we hope to work with in the future. To date, we have run over 700 events for engineers, developers, students, graduates, CTOs. We have run conferences, lightning talks, hackathons, all sorts. In January of this year, we made our 4,000th introduction through our Meet a Mentor program. We're really excited about that and looking forward to seeing where that's going to go next. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and this event is part of that. If you'd like to know more about any of our other communities, please do get in touch with myself or Barry, and we can take it from there. As we go through today's event, there are going to be stopping points with opportunities to ask questions. So if you think of any, please just make a note of them, and then at the appropriate time, Edward will say, right, here's a question section. Any questions about that? Please do unmute yourself, ask what you need to ask, and then we can carry on from there. This session is also being recorded, so you will be able to find it on YouTube, or I will put my LinkedIn profile in the chat later on, and you'll be able to message me and I'll send it out to you when it's ready. Normally about a couple of days, 2-3 days turnaround time now for our YouTube videos, so it will be ready pretty soon for you if you want to catch that. With no further ado, I will hand over to Edward, who's going to be speaking to us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Abby. 10 out of 10 recommend RecWorks. They are lovely people to work with. All right, I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. Yep, I hear you nodding. All right. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Edward, also known as the Archangel of Chaos. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to be talking to this entire group. I'm excited to share with you my story around adopting Next.js. But firstly, I just want to give you a little bit about my background. So I've been using React in Anger since 2017, and I started using Next.js in 2021. In my career, I've adopted many new technologies. I've delivered UIs using Angular 1.6, Vardin, Adobe Flex, and even C# WinForm. So lots of experience in adopting new tech. To set the scene for our story, I work at Ion Analytics, and in June of 2020, we started building InfraLogic, a data platform for investing in wind farms, roads, hospitals, and other key pieces of infrastructure around the world. Now, that's right, you heard me right, real infrastructure, not just fluffy clouds. In September of 2021, we converted InfraLogic over to Next.js, and this talk is about my journey so far with adopting Next.js, problems I've encountered, and solutions I'm applying. Grand. So what am I going to cover? I'm going to start with why. Why bother with any new technology, let alone Next.js? Why originally I didn't want to adopt Next.js, controversial, and why we eventually took the plunge. Once we're done with the why, I'll talk about the how we took an iterative approach to adopting Next.js, which focused on taking small steps whilst maintaining working software along the way. Now, with the why and the how, we'll go through step by step the journey. Unsurprisingly, we'll start with how it started, our React UI and BFF, Best Friends Forever architecture. But after we define the backend for front-end architecture, I'll be going over its iterative transformations. Now, we'll have dedicated time for questions throughout, as you heard. This won't be 30 minutes of me just talking at you nonstop. So this will be interactive. Full disclosure, I'm using this material as training material. So you'll be doing me a favor by asking questions. So it'd be invaluable to me to have questions like, Edward, old boy, you didn't explain server-side rendering very well. Can you run that by me one more time? So please ask questions. Then right at the end, for anyone who's left, I humbly ask for feedback via the perfection game. Now, if you want to play, stay tuned and you can play along at the end. All right, let's go. So why bother adopting any technology and having to learn new stuff? Personally, I feel the answer has to be to solve a business problem. This problem then acts as a reference to how the technology can objectively solve that problem. Now, for instance, take this picture. How might we judge if the cube or if the cylinder is better? Well, it depends on the problem. If your problem is stacking blocks or your problem is moving blocks around quickly, one or the other is better. Point is, context matters. How valuable a technology is will depend on the context it's used in. So once I know the problem, then I can optimize my technology choice for two things: reducing friction and increasing velocity. Now, let's agree on what these important words mean. I think of friction as the effort it takes to actually get started. And also friction is what keeps slowing me down. Easy example of this, React Router. It's a pain to plumb in, and maintaining it is not something that fills me with joy. It's something that slows me down, and it distracts from solving like real business problems. Now, velocity, how do I define this? Well, if I define solving a big business problem as answering a bunch of questions, then how fast I answer those questions is my velocity. The fastest way I know of answering any question is by using an existing answer. So yes, go copy and paste to your heart's content from Stack Overflow. But the question of like, will this technology speed me up is akin to, does this technology give me a bunch of answers to questions that I have? Good example of this. If my application needs an API to help me read and write data, then guess what? The Next.js built-in API is great for this. It's a solved problem. To summarize, deciding on adopting Next.js or any technology: 1, identify the problem, where I want to go to. 2, look at what's slowing me down from getting there. For instance, missing or annoying parts of like React development. Now 3, finally, like find things that would speed me up, problems that Next.js would solve for me out of the box. Now, if the stars align and I have all 3 of these things, I'm potentially in a good place to adopt Next.js, right? Right? Well, timing is important. In my experience, there are wrong times to adopt any new technology. If you're surrounded by fire, don't start adopting new technology. This is definitely not fine. In 2020, when we started InfoLogic, it was the wrong time to adopt Next.js. Luckily, I was only dealing with metaphorical fires. But again, the reasoning for why not goes back to friction and velocity. Friction-wise, we had more important sources of friction to resolve first. So Ion Analytics is a combination of many different companies, and the InfoLogic team was completely new, made up of individuals spanning 6 different companies. And most of us were learning the infrastructure domain for the first time. Now you might say, Edward, well, you know, Next.js is great, like it'll speed you up, but you don't have to worry about all these friction points. Well, in my experience, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Adopting new technology comes with an opportunity cost. Now, we had 0 Next.js experience in the team at the time, like some in the wider company, but like the adoption cost for Next would have just been like way too high. I think the final nail in the coffin was that effectively we'd already spent our like innovation token by choosing to adopt TypeScript so that everyone had a common language that we were working on. Cool. So what changed for us in September of 2021? What inspired us to explore the strange new world of Next.js? At this point, we've been through the forming and storming cycle of a new team, and we had a much better grasp of the business domain. Our problem now was balancing maintaining InfoLogic and our existing applications, whilst also speeding up the development of new ones. Like to support this case, like we needed to reduce friction with people working across different applications and to speed up how we develop new ones. So from a friction aspect, an obvious thing to do was to ensure all our applications use the same stack so that everyone knows that stack and then everyone can work on anything in theory. It's the concept of like staff liquidity. So grand, like reduce friction by standardization. However, that doesn't necessarily mean Next.js. Members of the audience might ask, well, what about Next or Svelte or other frameworks I can't pronounce? To answer that question, we looked at two things, which are kind of closely linked. One, the business goal of accelerating application development. And two, almost more important, the skill set within the team and the company. My expertise and the expertise of most of the company was in React. React is feature rich, and we have loads of experience building very slick user experiences in it. So changing the underlying framework to like Vue, Svelte, Angular was a bit of a non-starter. Like we'd need a lot of upside to justify throwing away all of our like React expertise. From a velocity point of view, Next.js made a lot of sense because it's an evolution from React. Like Next has a really large community around it, and Next also has a load of solved technical problems for us, such as the routing, which we could all benefit from. So at this point, just want to pause. I've talked a lot about the whys, and I just want to give an opportunity to ask some questions and tell me if I'm talking too fast as well.
So what do you like the most about Next.js?
What well, someone once told me like Next is very much React, and it is. It's just like it's not like going from English to French. It's not like a completely foreign language, and just all the solve problems. I probably can't emphasize enough how much like I just hate having to like stamp boilerplate code. But thank you for that question, Patrick.
I had one as well. So you talked about in 2020, you're like, you explained why that wasn't the time to try and adopt this. How far did you go before you jumped it? Had you done any prototypes or evaluation, or was it just you'd had a conversation and then disregarded it?
It's more the conversation disregarded it. Like when I start a greenfield project, it's like, what does the team actually know? And it was like, oh yeah, we got React experience. Oh, someone's done Vue. Go on. Oh, what else are other people doing? Oh, they're doing TypeScript, and oh, there's this really cool thing called Next.js. And then like they gave me this talk, and I was like, I don't understand most of that. So it was just like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm gonna get a handle of what the hell I'm doing. But when it came to like 2021, it was just like, well, a lot more people in the company had used it, and we now had hacked on it and done lightning talks and kind of built a foundation. So felt a lot more comfortable then.
Cool. No, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Carly. Any more questions? There will be abundance of opportunity. So for now, we've covered the why. Let's talk about how. All right. Iterative versus incremental delivery. This is a really powerful concept in software, and I absolutely love this image from Henrik for explaining it. Now, I want to go over this with you and show you how we applied it to adopting Next.js. So, context, agree on what important words mean. The problem here is that we're trying to get a user from A to B. We're transporting our user. And we know our user would eventually be happy with a car. That would be ideal for them. So along the top, you see incremental delivery to that, right? Basically, we start building a car right away, and we have progress. I imagine this is week by week. But notice that we don't have a functional car until week 4. Like our user is not happy, it's not going places until week 4. So review the bottom row, where we take an iterative approach. Now, again, things haven't changed. We're still aiming at a car, but the ethos here is that build working solutions and deliver value at each stage. So week 1, now a user might not be happy, but we have something usable they can skate around, and we can start learning about this, right? And then bit by bit, each iteration is an evolution. It's not a huge costly revolution. And like bit by bit, we're like making it better for the user. Now, if there's one image I want you all to take away from this talk, it's this, okay? So how does this apply to Next.js? Well, imagine the first approach on top. This incremental approach is completely rewriting UI from scratch into Next.js. Well, I predict your user's gonna have a bad time. What about the second approach? Is it possible to iteratively evolve a React UI to Next.js? Spoilers, yes. That approach is what I'll cover with you all now, and how to start with your skateboard and kind of level up bit by bit, whilst all the while still having a single working application in production. Good times. All right, let's start with how InfoLogic started off, and we'll start by defining a BFF finally. So our business problem is we've got a bunch of services and data that we need to integrate into a UI. Now, this diagram highlights one architecture for solving that. Rather than having our UI code having to marshal loads of data, we abstract it away from the UI into a backend for front-end service, a BFF. Now, this gives you a nice segregation of responsibilities. Your UI focuses on the look and the feel, and the BFF, the server, focuses on the validation and transformation. Now, this diagram is for the e-commerce domain. That's a very common pattern. You have various services and microservices that you may depend upon, and then the BFF handles the nitty-gritty of joining that all together and presenting it to the UI. So cannot thank Vidundi enough for this diagram. But for the purposes of this, we're going to simplify it to focus on what's important for us. So for InfoLogic and Ion Analytics, our architecture boiled down to this. We had our BFF servers running Node and Express, and within them, we define API routes used by the UI to interact with our various services. Then we have our React single page application, vanilla React. Now, as I said, we migrated iteratively to Next.js. So the first step was lifting and shifting this React application as is into Next.js. Now, what the hell does that mean? Like, let's look at how we started with that. All right, we're diving into code. To everyone that doesn't like IntelliJ dark mode, my sympathies. Now, what we're looking at is how we configure the application at the top level, and I'll walk you through the steps. All right, so as I said, we have Express and we have Next. Now, what you need to do is to start the Next application and start the Express application, which we had before. Now, here, this is the API routes I was talking about. Like, this is how we set up the API routes before with Express. Now, this stays the same. Well, what's interesting is we get the request handler out of Next so that we can start sending traffic from Express into Next, okay? This is how we hook it in. And then finally, this is just like the magical incantation to get your Next app running. Very high level pseudocode, should kind of work. Now, great stuff. So that was the top level. So, but there's a lot left for like lifting and shifting our beautiful React app into the paradise falls that is our Next.js land. There's a bunch of like basic but annoying tasks, what I characterize as handle turning, right? I listed them out here. I won't go through all of them. The main thing to note is on the left, you have concepts which are common to the create React app architecture, right? You've got your index.js, which bootstraps React and the other JavaScript libraries such as Google Analytics. They now live in an app.js file, okay? Alongside that, you typically have a base, before you typically had a base index HTML file, you know, the thing that had that your root div in it, which you hooked into. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. But if there's anything that was important in there, you can move that into a document.js file. Now, these things are really, really, really well documented by the Next.js documentation. If you don't know about it already and you're thinking of migrating Next.js, highly recommend you give it a read. Cool. Like, gonna skip over this stuff, but again, questions, opportunities for questions later. So great. We've boldly taken a step forward into our new frontier, albeit a really simple one. Next.js is now running our SPA. Like, functionally, the app behaves exactly the same. And you know, this step that we've done is like really small, but can be done really quickly. Like, all the handle turning work can take you a few days to crack from a cold start. The emphasis is that we're making a start and you're starting to get exposure to Next.js. So again, it's just that lifting and shifting of the app. Like, we're not doing anything. Like, in fact, like, it still has React Router at this point. Like we're just trying to like shim it in, right? Does this make sense? Does anyone have any questions about like that lifting and shifting step?
For you, what was the hardest part of migrating the BFF to Next.js?
This hardest first part, well, luckily I didn't do it. like one of the other developers picked this up. But when I practiced it again for this talk, I was just like, oh, there's a lot of nuances here that I documented in another step, which they aren't particularly hard. It's just like, oh, it's hard work. Like, you know, it's just having to go through it. And I don't think you get an appreciation for it until you actually do it. So even though it is easy, like in the order of days, it's still like, oh, you know, lots of different ways of thinking. Thanks for that question, Patrick. Any other questions?
I guess how quickly did you get something up and running? Like, roughly how long did it take?
Like, we continuous deployment. So like, start off on a branch, getting it run locally, and then like, oh, this works, ship it. And after the first day, we had something like running, and the second day it was just like tweaking small things.
Yeah.
It's impressive like how easy it is. I completely and honestly like say like the documentation is really good.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah. In fact, there is a dedicated page for like, if you have create React app, this is how you migrate to Next. So it's very useful.
Oh, awesome. That's cool.
Thanks, Carly. Any more questions? Don't be shy. No? All right. So we've just talked about like the first step, lifting and shifting. So now we're going to talk about like the API. So what am I going to cover here? Two things. I'm going to talk about the API that comes packaged from Next.js. It's really quite easy to learn. And then I'm going to share our testing strategy for it. Now, pay attention. If you know a better way of testing this API, I want to hear from you at the end. Yeah, so Next.js comes packaged with an API, and what we're looking at is the docs for it. And this will allow you to do all the work of a traditional BFF. Now, here in the screenshot, you can see it's defining an endpoint that fetches a blog post, and this is what it looks like. So Next has a very specific folder structure. So you've got this pages folder and then the API. The API, pages API is where everything lives. And what we're looking at is a dynamic endpoint, okay? So like a blog post has this PID, this PID, right? Which is the last part of the URL in this special bracket notation in the file, right? Inside the file, we have a function. And here you can see that we can access that PID via the query, right? Now it's elided here, but like you can imagine that then you have code that would go off and read your CMS or load it from the database. But it just found this like so easy to use, right? And again, advice here, the best advice here to read again, go read the docs. It's fantastic, as you see, very easy to comprehend, and it's important to like get the nuances to really get to grips with the API. Grand. Now, I hear all the TDD enthusiasts in the crowd go, but Edward, how do you test this? Well, let's look at that. This is a load of stripped down code on how we test our API in Next.js. Now, I assume everyone's furiously digesting it, so I'll give you all a second. All good? I'm gonna walk through it. Now, remember, bonus points if you can tell me in chat or a discussion later about better ways to do this. But the core library we're using here is Supertest, and it wraps our HTTP layer, right? So with that, we have this test client method, and it's effectively a wrapper for our API, right? It lets us like poke in our Next.js handler, right, from before. Now, the eagle-eyed of you will see this terrible hack that we're breaking into the internals of Next.js, like the distribution, right? This is to get access to the API resolver. Now, the trade-offs for this ugliness, brittleness, is that we're actually testing the API as it actually runs, or close to at least. So how does our test look like? Well, as before, we've got our blog post endpoint in this PID file, right? So we import it as we do. So we're not doing anything fancy. We're using the code as is. And we wrap it in our test client. And then using Supertest, we can make HTTP calls against it. Here, for instance, get, do get. Once we get the HTTP result, we can do all the normal checks you might do against it. Now in this contrived and basic example, let's pretend that the blog post got eaten by the devil, and hence will always return a 404. That's like something you can very easily test. So why go to all this trouble, right? Like the test client, well, why is like the test client allows us to rapidly unit test the API, and we get all the happiness that comes with test-driven development. This method makes it straightforward to migrate any Express API inputs that we have into Next.js bit by bit. So quick pause, like this makes sense. I'm seeing some people nod. Does anyone have any kind of burning questions or kind of like suggestions or like that's wrong? All right. Cool. Let's carry on. Fantastic. So at this point of the adoption, we've got our SPA running inside of Next, and now we've got our API inputs inside of Next as well. The code we had in the BFF for serving the API using Express, that's now gone. It's been migrated. At this point, no visible user changes, and we still have a fully functioning application. All right. May have put in too many question points here, but like that was the API. Like questions, suggestions, thoughts, feelings.
Sorry, I'm a bit new to Next.js, but you've shown the path with the like the URL params, the post ID, basically. And I was wondering if like, can you have the folders with the URL params as well? Like, can you have in the middle, somewhere in the middle, like additional params?
I think so. I think it's somehow possible to do it. I don't have the answer off the top of my head. I can't remember the last time we do it, but it is definitely possible to have like multiple parts of it. But Mihal, I'll get back to you on how to do that exactly, or go read the docs.
All right.
Cool. Appreciate that. Any other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Edward.
Yeah. Hi, Yash.
Sorry, I think I was muted. The testing file that you showed earlier and then the slide before.
Yes.
So I was just curious with the function, the test client, where do you use the handler that we pass in?
Right. So this is the parameter to it. It's just basically wrapping like either like the blog post thing or your user authentication or like some sort of post endpoint. But like here, we pass in the handler, and this is exactly the file in the Next.js API definition. Does that answer your question? Have I misunderstood?
So I was curious how the handler, the parameter handler, was being used in the test client function.
Yes, you're completely right. I've deleted the wrong piece of code in there, but like the API resolver is supposed to invoke the handler.
The handler. Okay.
I will correct that slide. Thank you. Sharp-eyed. I like it. Handler.
Cool, thanks.
Grand. Already got something out of this presentation. Happy days. Right. let's continue on our journey. Our next step on our epic quest into the unknown is refactoring the single page application. So, right, alrighty. Let's cover how we're going to bury React Router and never speak about all the pain and suffering it's caused ever again. But seriously, Next.js has an inbuilt router and it's a joy to work with. I'm going to give you a very brief overview. Then I'm going to talk about how basically I don't worry too much about testing it. So to begin, oh, hey, it's the Next.js docs again. To reiterate the advice, go read the docs. They're fantastic, easy to comprehend. And with Next.js, it uses that pages folder again to define pages. And here you can see a very basic about page. And it's just, like I said earlier, like a React component, right? It's very similar, very familiar. And you can have a file for each page that you want, right? For instance, if I wanted a contact page, I just create a contact.js, and in the component, you could just have just return an email address. It's that simple. I think the best way to think about this is purely as these files as entry points, right? Extract the core of your component to a separate class, and then test it as you would normally test any sort of React component. Speaking of testing, for next routing, do as little as you can, but no less. This is because there's so little code to configure that what you're testing with the routing is you're effectively testing the library. Like, don't bother, don't test the routing directly, right? Trust the library. However, instead, do write end-to-end tests that test the user flow, which depend on routing. For instance, when the user lands on the homepage and is like, oh, I need some help, they click on help, then you expect to show a page with the support email. Now, I'm not going to check if navigating to /help works, right? But routing to that page is implicitly part of this flow. Now, how do you do that? There's a plethora of end-to-end tools out there, and Avro kindly introduced me to Task Cafe recently. But so long as you're not using Selenium, you're probably good. Internet Explorer is dead now, right? In Ion Analytics, we standardized on Cypress.io. I'm on the fence about it. It gets the job done. I do like that, it has auto recording features. It creates like screenshots and videos when tests fail. But the idea is like keep it as a thin layer and just kind of keep it there to keep you honest, to kind of smoke test the testing environment. For the purists out there, if you really want to do some unit testing, then what I've done is kind of check that I've correctly set the href properties on my links, right? I'm not attempting to wrap the next router with a test harness. I really don't think it's worth it. But simple checks like, yes, I have navigated to the right page with the right parameters, definitely worth it. So Next.js speeds you up with its routing solution. It removes the friction around setting it up and having to maintain routing code and dependencies. All round happy days in my experience with it. Cool, a new challenger approaches. Awesome beans. We've just covered Next.js pages and refactoring away from the single page application into multiple pages. So now let's talk about rendering those pages. I'm going to cover client-side rendering, vanilla React, versus server-side rendering, also known as dynamic rendering. Firstly, I'll cover why it's important. Now, the context I'm talking about, the problem, is rendering a page with dynamic pieces of data. For instance, a blog post where you have widgets that are customized to the user. Now, how fast that page appears on the screen affects how fast the page feels to the user. It's a subjective measure of the quality of the page. In our scenario, like time is money. I always want to add like a premium product feeling to make things seem instantaneous. Right. So within that context, that problem, I'll go over what is CSR, what is SSR and how it makes you faster, how to do SSR in Next.js, and finally, I'll offer you a little gotcha that got me with SSR. And the hint is there's no client on the server side. So, all right, let's go. Client-side rendering. Massive thank you to Monica for this flow diagram. Now, time flows from left to right. And what you can see here is what happens when the user first hits a client-side rendered site. Along the bottom is what the user is seeing. Along the top is what's happening behind the scenes. So let's go through it. Initially, user hits the server, and we return an index HTML. This is just raw HTML at this point, right? Inside of that HTML, there'll be references to JS files, right? Including your like React app. The user's client, the browser, will need to download all of these, right? Usually by going back to your server for it. Now, only once the browser has the JavaScript files, then it's able to execute them. And this is where all the pretty colors appear on the screen. Now, right at the end, once that's all happened, the blank screen now goes away and the whole page is both visible and can actually be clicked on, can be interacted on, right? The core point here I want to highlight is with client-side rendering, the user has to wait for something to appear on the screen. And this is what we define as the initial time to render problem. So given that, right, how might we solve the initial time to render with server-side rendering? Again, massive thank you to Monica. Same setup as before. Time moves left to right. So let's review and highlight the differences. Same kickoff. User hits your server, but this time the server has rendered more than just vanilla HTML, empty HTML. There's content in there as well. So even by the second step, the browser's received it and can now render something meaningful to the user, right? Now, this still has to go through the JavaScript, go through grabbing the JavaScript to make the page interactable. So steps 2, 3, and 4 are effectively the same. Now, this is what I'm getting at with regards to the user feeling that the page is faster. In this setup, server-side rendering, the only thing that's actually faster is how fast the page is visible. We've optimized that initial time to render, but note that we still have to wait for the page to be interactable until the end. Now, your mileage may vary, but typically a user doesn't click on a page until it's interactable anyway. Like I'm talking the order of hundreds of milliseconds. Making the page appear on the screen though, within 100 milliseconds, that will make your site feel as if it's instantaneous. Now, citation needed, you can go Google and research on this. Interestingly, this level of like low latency isn't something I traditionally worry about, like not at first. Now, my ethos is get the product working before you start worrying about getting it working quickly. But given that we've nailed things down already, like it's fantastic that at this point, Next.js gives us the ability to start doing this optimization. So grand, lots of theory, but let's look at how it works in Next.js. What are we looking at here? It's code to help server-side render our blog page. We have this getServerSide method, and it's the heart and soul of like server-side rendering in Next.js. Now, take a moment, like breathe in, right? All right, grand, you're now all experts. You all know it. I can move on, right? Just kidding. Let's walk through what we're going on here, right? Firstly, to highlight, this method lives in your Next.js page. It's called when the page is first requested, like when the user hits your server. And it's designed to return the initial properties that your page component needs. In this case, the actual blog post is what we're trying to get to, right? Now, there's a bunch of edge cases I've highlighted here. Now, this comment is just kind of hand waving about the fact, excuse me, that you need to do like user validation. You need to start thinking about authentication on every page. Remember, it's not a single page application anymore. You can't rely on the top level application component dealing with all the authentication. Now, here you can see that this method has access to also the context of the user's request. And in our case, it has the PID, that post ID from the Next.js root URL we saw earlier. And we can call our own service to fetch the data. So yes, this is very much the job our BFF was doing at the start, fetching and validating the data. What happens if it's not there, for instance? my headset decided to click off. So why is this all useful? It goes beyond just sending. Why is this useful? It goes beyond just sending back the rendered HTML that we spoke about in the previous example. This is actually sending back the data to the UI as well at the same time. So it makes like that rendering the page all the more faster. Like you notice here that it's not really black magic. Like even Next, labels this as a basic feature, right? So by adopting Next, we're able to develop faster by using these features to solve a bunch of problems for us, such as that initial time to display problem. But hey, no free lunches, right? Like, so what are the pitfalls here? Right. Here's a nice gotcha for you. Say you've got a component that reads the user's cookies or local storage, or say that you measure the client's the browser width, or the user agent. Guess how many of those things are available on the server side? Yeah, that's right, 0. So sometimes you do need to do client-side rendering. Now, here's a very Stack Overflow-esque solution that we have for preventing server-side rendering. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. I get the feeling that it causes issues outside of with static rendering. I'm not an Next.js expert, so please feel free to advise. But the whole idea is that to delay the rendering until it gets to the client side. All right. All good? Does it make sense? We're going to start wrapping up. Cool. So where is the architecture at now? A brave new world of Next.js. It's a single application and code base which does both the API and we've got lightning fast server-side rendered pages. So happy days. Now let's review again the steps we got to get here. So in analytics, we migrated our flagship InfoLogic product to Next.js starting in September of 2021. Now this was with the goal of standardizing our tech stack and speeding up the application development across the company. Rather than take a big bang rewrite approach, we underwent an iterative transformation of our React UI and Best Friends Forever architecture. We lifted our shiny React UI and transplanted it into Next.js. We then migrated the API into Next.js. Then we split the pages, single page into next pages. And last but not least, we started leveraging the server-side rendering to make this slick, responsive feel to our UI. Cool. Grand. You're still awake and with me. So here's a screenshot for InfoLogic for you all to enjoy. It's my baby, so feel free to ask me anything. But yes, ask me anything. The time has come. Questions?
I guess I can start off with a quick one. So I think you'd mentioned towards the start about, I think you mentioned innovation tokens and you'd migrated to TypeScript across the board at the company. Is that right? I'm assuming you're still using TypeScript with Next.js.
Yes,
is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Innovation token is something I read recently about. You only get so many, which is a nice phrase, right? It's a great power comes great responsibility. So again, it's a currency to be spent with. Yeah, we were like JavaScript, TypeScript at the start. So we just went, okay, let's get a unified language, and TypeScript works really well for back end and front end. So it was like, yeah, let's do that, and we're still using it. And yeah, it's not been easy to begin with. The compile times make me cry, but it's been a massive benefit.
That's cool.
Thanks, Carly.
I guess no worries. I guess one more question on. Did you do any comparison metrics of your app, client-side rendering versus server-side rendering to see what your gains were?
Yeah, I mean, the Ben Evans, Martin Verberg of Measure, Don't Guess, we didn't do that rigorously, unfortunately. We have like vague metrics on like the render time, but I think the biggest thing was just the feel of it. Like we were like, oh, let's translate our transaction page. You click on it, and usually like you click on it, you see that little flicker, you see that little loading spinner, and then it comes, right? But with Next.js, it's just like you click on it, and it's there. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
It's just I never noticed the speed bump until I didn't have to go over it again.
Yeah, I've got you. Cool. Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, Edward.
Hey, Yash.
Are there any deployment changes, once you guys totally migrated to Next?
No, it's just like, it's just a process that runs in Node, and we have Docker containers, and it just doesn't matter. Like, you package it up, you deploy it, and it was just transparent. Like, yeah,
Oh.
no, that was definitely like zero change there.
But with the times or anything of that sort, were there like, did the deployment times increase? I mean, since I was just assuming Next is kind of heavyweight in terms of the library as such.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean. If you mean like spinning up the Next.js process, I mean, our deployment times are in the order of like small number of minutes, because not because of Next, but because we have a load of data we load at the start. That's generally not a problem for us, because like you're running in ECS, right? So you've got a load of containers, and when the new ones are healthy, the old ones go away, and having just, it's mostly just kind of like safety checks before you turn the server on. So like I say small number of minutes, that's kind of like the long tail of it, right? Like realistically, I think it's seconds, right? Like
yeah.
No,
I was just curious with like the Docker images and all the build times for it.
Oh yeah, those were always like long to build, right? Like I don't measure it. It's probably like 5 minutes or something, like something of that order. Again, it's just like we have it there before, and the advantages of like Dockerizing everything to have a snapshot like is not something we're optimizing. But yes, it's a concern. But as in it's a valid concern, but like luckily it wasn't a problem for us.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Like we do ship like changes, and in about 5 minutes in as live, and then we run all our Cypress tests, and in another like 10 minutes it'll be in production. So like 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, that's quick, and that's quite quick.
Oh yeah. Like there's a phrase of optimize for mean time to recovery, and that means like if production goes down, fix it. And if it like takes you like 15 minutes to figure out what's going on, and then another 15 minutes to like push the change and make it go, then you've got like a half an hour recovery time, maybe like quarter an hour, right? Whereas you could be more defensive and optimize for mean time to failure. Let's like be really stringent with your testing, and like be really defensive against going to production. It's just like no, like in my experience, it's a false economy. Like you always have bugs, right? So it's better to fix fast than to pray you're perfect. Cool. Just to highlight, like, yeah, these are we are looking at the wind farms that I was talking about right at the start of the talk. So this kind of product is helping us do that. It was just like very exciting how little any of these components, React components, had to change in Next.js. Like some of them like were reading like cookies and stuff like that on the client side, and it was just very light wrapper to translate them. But like in terms of velocity, it's just like if you just engage with Next as just rewriting React code, you're good. You're good, really.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much, Edward. Does anybody have any final questions before I bring us to a close?
If not, then the promised perfection game. So highly value feedback, now or offline. Like please rate the talk out of 10, share what was valuable and enjoyable, and then state to make it 10 out of 10. I would have to have. So like you could say this was a 5 out of 10. I enjoyed like the screenshots. To make it like 10 out of 10, like twice as good, I need more like cat memes. So you can email me, you can Slack me, or you can find me on Twitter, or like if you have time now, feel free to offer feedback. Cool. Over to you, Abby.
Okay, so obviously you can see, as Edward said, you can email him, Slack him, or find him on Twitter to give some feedback. But all that's left for me to say is thank you so much, Edward, for coming and speaking to us today. And it's obviously been very good for you all to come and join us as well. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Front Engineers, yes, you will get used to that, event. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Edward. Thanks, Abby. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers, bye.